Going to start. Now, last week we started the tractate Rosh Hashanah, and if you recall, we had the 4 new years. Maybe I'll just go over those really quickly, and then I'll tell you where we're going to pick up. But there's 4 new years. So I'm on the first Mishnah, where it says Mishnah chapter 1. If you want to look in the English, or it's at the very top of the Hebrew. But we did this last time. I'm going through it really quickly. Arba'ah Rosh Hashanim Haim. There are 4 beginnings of the year, 4 Rosh ahead, beginning of the year. We have this holiday that many of you have heard of called Rosh Hashanah. It's coming up. But Rosh, it's called the first of the year, but then it's telling us there actually are 4 beginnings of the year, heads of the year. Echad B'Nisan, the first one, actually it's interesting, the first one they'd say is not Rosh Hashanah, but the first of Nisan, which in fact is no holiday at all. Other than Rosh Chodesh, every new month is Passover is the 15th of Nisan. So the first beginning of the year that they tell us about isn't even a holiday. A lot of confusing things here. The first of Nisan. Although I'll repeat that in the Bible, that does seem to be the new year. It's still called to this day, to this day, it's the same Bible. We haven't changed it. But when you, as a kid, I learned that's the first month, the Nisan. So anyway, the first of Nisan. That's the Rosh Hashanah L'Malachim. That's the New Year of the Kings. U'Regalim, the festivals. Be'echad Be'elul, the first of Elul, which we celebrate today. That's Rosh Hashanah L'Ma'aser Behema. That's the first of the year in tithing your animals. Is anybody here that's tithing animals? I don't know if there's anybody here but that today would be the day where you count how many animals you've got and you take 10%.
And do what?
And give them to the priest. Give them to the
So what they're going to do?
I'll take them.
Who's the resident?
In the absence of the high priest. I'll take your no, not cats. I'm allergic to cats and dogs, but it's cattle. It's referring mostly to cattle. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon Amrim Be'echad B'Tishrei. So Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon say that's the first of Tishrei. Be'echad B'Tishrei Rosh Hashanah L'Shanim. So the first of Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah, what we celebrate as Rosh Hashanah, is the new year when it comes to years, whatever that means, counting years, like the year 1970. And that's actually 5,770, whatever we're going to come to. Ula Shmitim, Ula Yovalot, and also for sabbatical and for Jubilee. For planting, it's the taxes that you would give on planting. Ula Yerakot, and also for vegetables, the gifts you're going to give. So all that has to do with taxation. And then Be'echad B'Shvat, the first of Shvat, Rosh Hashanah Le'ilan, it's the beginning of the year for trees. K'divrei Beit Shammai, that's what Beit Shammai says, who is always wrong. Can you imagine always being wrong? Like a husband. Right. Somebody told me that joke one time. If a husband speaks and there's no one there around, is he still wrong? You told me that joke, right? Maybe I messed it up, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, so Shammai is like us. So Shammai is always wrong. Beit Hillel Omrim B'chamisha Asar. So Hillel says it's the 15th, Tu B'Shvat, and that's what we celebrate. All right. So those are the 4 years. Okay, and we've gone back and forth. They're discussing now the first one. It'll take a while. The first one, which is the first of Nisan, which they say is the new year of the kings. Okay. Now, I'd like you to go to if you're in the Hebrew, it's the second page in the Hebrew. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lines, exactly 10 lines from the top, and we're on the 4th word, Amar Mar. If you're looking at the Hebrew, you'll see a 2b on top, and it's on the left side. The master has here said. All right, Amar Mar. So the master means a teacher said. So now, if you remember, they're talking about kings and when you started, and in the Bible, the date is always corresponds to the year of the king. So they will always say in the 23rd year of King, whatever his name, in the 3rd month, but that's the date. And so then there's some question about when that year starts. So Amar Mar, mate ba'adar. Okay, so if a king dies in Adar, Adar is according to that system, the last month of the year. Okay, and the month right before Nisan. In the biblical counting, it would be the 12th month. There's 12 months, just like we have 12 months. So there's 12 months, and Adar is the 12th month. Amar Mar mate ba'adar. So let's say a king dies in Adar. Ve'amad acher tachtav be'adar. and then the new king comes in Adar. Okay, so maybe it's simultaneous. We have the sense that it would be simultaneous because that's our constitutional system, right? There's never a time where there's not a president. And you have that expression, the king is dead, long live the king, which means that there's never a time without a king. I imagine that's a British saying, right? Because so there's never a time when there's not a king. However, it may not always work out that way. There could be a time where the king dies unexpectedly, and it's not clear who the next king is going to be, so there's a transition period. But this is assuming that the transition period is either non-existent or very short, because one king dies in the month of Adar, and the next king starts to reign right away, or at least in Adar. Monim shana lazeh ulazeh. So when you're counting the year, it can count for either. So either it's the final reign, let's say it's the 23rd reign of King X, or you could also call it year 1 of King Y. Both would be correct. So the year 23 or the year 1. They're both correct. Okay. Everybody get that? Took me about a half hour to understand that. But you can use either system of counting. Either you start at 1 from that king, so that year in effect is 2 years, because the king died in the last year. Okay. Pshita. So, and by the way, we learned already. So then for the next king, by Nisan the 2nd, you would call that year 2 of his reign, even though he only reigned for 3 days. He had 2 years of reign. The year 1 was the year before, and year 2 is the next month, because he started as king in Adar, and then there's Nisan. Okay. And you could also call that year the year 23 of the late king. Either would be correct. Now it tells us Pshita, which the Talmud often has. Pshita means that's obvious. And there's this idea like, don't waste my time. Don't teach me things that I could easily figure out on my own. Why are you wasting my time? And then it's always got to be more obvious. It's got to be more complicated. So then the Talmud's job becomes to complicate it. To complicate the sentence and to say, no, it's not as obvious as you think, and I had to say it because you may have been led in error by a different reasoning process. So Mahuda Tema, because you might say. So, I mean, if you're interested in the structure of Talmud, this is very common. You have the word Pshita, which means that's obvious, and then you have Mahuda Tema, so no, it's not obvious, because you could easily say. You might, in error, the Mahuda Tema always introduces faulty reasoning. But something that you could easily fall into. And so what I said right now would correct your faulty reasoning. So here it is. Ma'udetema, shata lebeitre lo minyan. Okay, you might think that you can't do that. A year can't have 2 counting systems. It's either got to be year 23 of King Shlomo's rule or year 1 of the next King Moshe. It can't be both. You might think it's too confusing and you might very well think that. It's too confusing to have 2 systems of counting in a year, so you just pick one or the other. Kamash Malan, what we just said is we're here to tell you, that literally what it means. I'm here to teach you that you can do that. Even though it's a little confusing that you have 2 systems of counting, you can. That year can have 2 numbers. Okay? Any questions? Mate b'Nisan. Okay, so now the king died in Nisan. The Amad acher tachtav b'Nisan. And then another king dies. No, the other king comes up. The other thing becomes king in Nisan. Okay? Monin shana lazeh ulazeh. Okay, same thing. So that you count, it's year 1, it's year 29 of King Shlomo, and it's year 1 of Moshe. Same thing. Pshita, same thing. That's obvious. Why are you even bothering with this? Mahu detemana, you might think, Ki amrin an yom achad b'shana, chashuv shana, b'sof shana. You might think that a single day can be counted as a year. Like if he dies at the end of Adar, that's a year. That's year 1 of the new kings. The new king becomes king at the very end of Adar, the last day of Adar, and then the next day is year 2 of his reign. So in effect, a day is counted as a year. You might think that's allowed at the end of a year. But b'echad b'shana chashuv shana, b'sof shana, aval b'tchila shana lo amrinan. But you might think you can't do that at the beginning of a year. So if a king dies in the 1st of Nisan and the second king, so then that becomes the year 237 of his reign. Sorry, year. That's probably nobody would live that long. That's the year 23 of his reign. even though in effect it's only a day, you might think you can't do that at the beginning of the year. You can only do it at the beginning. So we are teaching you, you're allowed to do it whether he dies at the end of the year or the beginning of the year. That we've learned that. Okay? Any questions? Yes. Good, because I need a break. Yeah. What's the question?
Interpret biblical writing,
Uh-huh.
and at that time there was no 5,000 or 3,000, whatever, years.
Yeah, it's all they had in the Bible was the kings.
Right.
The reign. They had two things. You're going to see. They had two things. They had the reign of the kings. They also counted time from leaving Egypt. That was also a source point. And a lot of these discussions are about what's an important time to start history. Go ahead.
So, well, the question is, I mean, this codification is taking place, around 300, a year 300? By that time,
Yeah.
did they have this numerical
They did.
system where
They did. They would at that point in the Talmud they would refer to the, so they had it. So they're sort of figuring out where it came from.
Through all of this effort, nobody's going to use it.
Oh, that's not true. So first of all, it wasn't set in stone. You know, there was something that there was a accounting system that was just becoming used by them, and we are reading now the process whereby that becomes canonical. Our current counting system, the year 5,700 and whatever, they're just deciding in the Talmud. We're reading their notes that leads them to that decision. That's what the Talmud is. So it hasn't been decided yet. It's leaning in that direction, but you see.
This is the process of going there and doing.
That's right. That's right. Right.
And so that the date 5,000 whatever is based on leaving Egypt?
No, it's not.
Predates it.
No. I mean, so you might think that. I mean, if you think, so you're going to see as we go through it. I mean, and unfortunately, like I said, these are complicated arguments, but you can't go through it till you go through it. But you're going to see all sorts of possible starting points for Jewish history. So one is, and I have to say, there's an ideological significance to what they choose. So the possible starting points are the creation of the world. That's when we start counting. Another possibility is leaving Egypt. Another possibility that they have is Sinai. I mean, wouldn't that make sense? Like, that's when we really became a holy people. So Sinai, that's also a possibility. And we know the date of Sinai. How they figure out the date of creation is interesting. But the Torah itself tells us the date they left Egypt. And the Torah itself tells us the date that they of Sinai. And there's also the possibility of the day that the temple was completed. Because then we really become... So what is the beginning? What's the Big Bang? You know, that created the Jewish people. That's what the discussion's about. And you see the answer is not obvious. You could draw a logical argument for each of those things. In some ways, the Exodus makes a lot more sense. Sinai makes it.
Just so really quickly, if we assume that this was being written 1,700 years ago, roughly, and we adhere to the 5,700 numerical system,
right.
This is about in the year 4,000. When this is being written, I mean, had they determined that?
Oh, had they determined that this was the year 4,000?
4,000, give or take.
No, they hadn't. No, that they had a different way of figuring out when the world was created.
Happen? When did the 5,000?
So nobody really knows exactly, but several hundred years later.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, but I will say that you maybe at some point I'll bring it in. There is a not illogical way of figuring that. You could do it. You go back. Because the Torah tells you how long people lived.
Yeah.
So you have to make certain assumptions. But, Adam lived, 930 years. And then you go through the generations, you count. And then you make some assumptions about time in between. Now, those assumptions are key assumptions. And when you get to their time, you figure, okay, this is... And it's something that they believed for a very long time. And Christians borrowed it from Jewish figurings, too. So, I mean, there are fundamentalist Christians that actually accept that the world is only... 6,000 years old, whatever, and it's based on genealogies that are in the Bible.
Okay.
There's a book, a sacred text. There's a book called, I forgot, Sefer Toldot, which actually that's what it is. It's somebody just wrote a book figuring out here's where we are in time, and they base themselves on how long Adam lived. How long the flood? Remember, the flood was only 40 days. What happened after that? And getting up to this particular king, and you can do the math, and that's what you end up with.
So somehow I'm not surprised that ancient Jews Well, near-biblical Jews came up with several common eras.
Yeah.
Not just one.
Several common eras, right. Yeah, I know. I mean, that's not to mention the 4 that I mentioned in the Mishnah, too. But it also, I mean, it also tells you something about Western culture, that it starts with the beginning of Christianity, too. And that's the culture we live in. Every time we identify the year as 2014, we're saying something about the culture we live in, although it's not necessarily our culture, but it's the culture that we live in. And so whatever year 1 is really important in identifying. Even Israel goes by 2014, although every newspaper will have the Jewish date on it too. But I do think also the idea that we start our calendar with the creation of the world as opposed to the Exodus, so it's not a national. We don't say the world started. We don't say we count based on us. We say we count based on everything, and that's a very different ideological statement than we count based on when Christianity started. Although for Christians, it's got such universal significance that they feel like that's year 1. But for us, we don't take our particular story and say that's our year 1. We don't. Our year 1 is when the whole universe started. And I think that that's an interesting statement that we're making.
Well, if you would have trouble with negative numbers, then you'd want to start
right
at the very beginning.
That's true.
So you wouldn't have to use a negative
That's
number.
True. Yeah, it's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah, you wouldn't have to have this BC, BCE.
Well,
right
how about
before
all that time before the Big Bang?
I know. So but there was no time at that point. Ask a physicist to explain that. But the Big Bang, even though there's theoretically before the Big Bang, that wasn't time. That was something else. That was called slime. I don't know. You're right. It gets. Yeah, I made it up. Yeah. Okay. All
So
right,
it's universally accepted that Adam lived to 900 plus years.
No, it's in the Bible. It's not universally accepted. The Bible tells us how long he lived. So if you accept the word of the Bible, he lived 930 years. Yeah.
Well, the theory
Nobody is making it up when they look at those. They're in the Torah itself.
The theory that we learned in Israel was that it was seasonal.
Whatever, yeah. I mean, you could play around with the year, yes, with the word year, and it wasn't actually 900. It was actually 10-day weeks. Nobody knows. It uses the word year. Yeah. All right. I'll do a little bit more. I know we're having fun here, but we have to get back to Meit ba'Adar. The king died in Adar. Okay. Ve'amad acher tachtav b'Nisan. Okay. And then the next king comes in Nisan, the next month. All right, so it might be that he died on midnight of the last day of Adar, and then the new king is 1201, which makes it Nisan, however it works in the Jewish calendar. But it also could be, remember, there's the transition time. There could be the transition time. Monim Rishon LaRishon. Okay, so the new king, Adar, that's year 1 of his reign. So that's in counting that date, it's year 1. Vishniya L'Sheni, and it's the second year of this. And then when it gets to be Nisan, it's the second year. And then we have the same thing. Pshita, isn't that obvious? Lo tzricha, we need it. De'imnu ale me'adar of the melech ben melechu. So it might be this, that one king dies in Adar, and there's a transition period. And he's actually appointed in Adar, but he doesn't get to start ruling until Nisan. Now, why? I don't know. Maybe he needs a training period sometimes. Maybe he's a kid, and there has to be sort of a regent that's cute. But even though he was appointed in Adar, you don't start counting him as king until, even though he was appointed king in Adar, yes, you don't start counting him until he actually became king, which was in Nisan. You might think that you start his reign when he was appointed. But you don't. You start his reign when he actually starts serving as king. And there is the possibility of this transition time where there actually isn't a king. And that could happen in a monarchy. In our constitutional system, right, that can't happen. Someone's got to be president. But in that system, it could be there. We don't have a king. We have a council. We have a legislative council. But we have those 20 days where we don't have a king. We appointed the king, but he's not ready yet. He's off, maybe he's fighting somewhere. We got to wait till he gets here. But until he gets here, we don't count the years of him as king. So you might think that you count it when he's appointed, but you don't count it until he starts ruling.
It exists in many monarchies today where they call it the interregnum period, where you have the gap in.
Yeah, and actually you have that several times in the Bible, so they're aware of that too. There's several times where, mostly because there was civil war. that often happens when a king dies. It's not always a smooth transition. There's also occasionally a period where the king is too young.
Yeah.
The king is an 8-year-old boy, and he's not ready. Yeah, so that's Josiah. Josiah had both. There was a civil war, and he was too young. And okay. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan said, "Minayin lemlachim she'ein monim lahem ela b'Nisan." So Rabbi Yochanan asked an obvious question. So why Nisan? Why do you start the reign of kings in Nisan? It seems arbitrary. Okay, so why Nisan? Now, what we know about Nisan from our own perspective is it's what holiday? Passover. Okay, I see that we're out of time. So they're going to prove why Nisan is the logical time to start the counting of kings. So I know that you'll be in suspense for that. So luckily we'll have class next week and you can find out.
Thank you.